Speaking of what's coming for you, got a lot on the table today. So, welcome to Raw Food. Jay, what's going on at UC Berkeley? Speak to it.
All right. So the news is saying UC Berkeley banned white people from this
Sure
place.
did. That's what
That
the
is
news
not
article
exactly.
said.
Yeah, that's the headline. That's not what happened.
That's not what happened. It's not what happened.
It's what happened was
What had happened was,
a specific co-op, one of 20. There are 20 cooperative houses.
and the reason
One
you know this
co-op.
is because you were active in one of them. I give that context. Continue, my
Yeah,
friend.
yeah, I'm getting there. One co-op said, "Hey, we're banning white guests." Now, what co-op was this? So within the co-op system, the co-op system is called the Berkeley Student Cooperative. It is not part of the school. The school does not own it. The school does not operate it. All right, that's very important. They are an independent nonprofit that goes all the way back to the Great Depression. It was set up so that students would be able to have affordable housing during the Great Depression. Okay, they have a central organization, but each house gets to operate more or less independently.
Okay.
Okay. So because this house gets to operate independently, this house is now called the People of Color themed house. When I lived there, it was called the African American
African-American.
house
Yeah.
or Afro house.
Right. It was Afro House when I knew it as Afro House when we were there.
Yes. Doesn't mean like you had to be black to live there. When
Or have an
I moved
afro.
in, it was, yes, you had to have an afro. When I moved in, it was actually a bunch of white folks in there, and I was warned, hey, it's name only. But then I worked with the co-op system to pass something that like wouldn't have a legal objection to it, but allow them to still like, give these slots to the people that it was intended for. Well, how do you do that? Because you can't just say we're only giving these slots to black people. You're going to get sued for that. So they said, okay, we're going to require an essay, and we're going to give preference to people that are ethnic studies majors or African American studies majors.
Okay.
So by doing that, you're not necessarily saying only black people, right? But you're paving a way so that black folks can get into that specific co-op. There's a whole points ranking system when it comes to trying to get in, because you have to apply to get into the whole thing. And then based on that, that's how you get in, and blah, blah, blah. And it's oversubscribed. So basically the houses that are not as popular end up with people getting in that way. So as a means of building up points so that they can get into other houses. So needless to say, we were able to create some change there, thankfully. They gave us some little award for it or whatever. And I will say that
Nice.
the co-ops were actually a lot more organized when it came to parties, when it came to safety. I know people think of the co-ops as just like this bohemian lifestyle thing, but they were actually incredibly well organized compared to the fraternities, actually.
Got it.
Yes.
Are the fraternities on the Berkeley campus, are they Berkeley affiliates, or are they a separate entity similar to houses like the Afro House?
Separate entities, but what they do, they want to be recognized by the school. That is, viewed as being like a good thing, a higher tier thing. We call it being on campus or being off campus, right? So if you're not recognized by the school, you can still be the whatever chapter of whatever fraternity at whatever university,
but you're off campus.
You're technically off campus. You're not recognized by the school, and so what that technically means is you're not subject to the certain regulations. And so what the fraternities that are on campus will do is try to discourage people from going there. But the thing is, these things ebb and flow. These fraternities will be off campus 1 year, and then you'll come back 5 years later, and they'll be on campus. It ebbs and flows. The fraternity that I was in has been on the Berkeley campus for, upwards of 120 years, and there have been years where they were off campus, but of course several more years when they were on campus. So one, I was not aware that Afro House changed the name to the POC themed house, and they clearly did that for PC reasons. We used it as a safe space, not only for black folks when it was the Afro House, but also for other folks. When you were head of the Latino Pre-Law Society, we threw the party for that club at Afro House. Nobody was mad about that. It was all good. You
Right.
know,
Everybody was too trashed.
we had good ass time too. It was great.
That party was sick.
Yeah. We've been able to that house has hosted parties for the football team, the basketball team, because the black fraternities and sororities do not have housing on campus. The only
Ooh,
black,
what's up with that? Speak to that. What's that about?
well, the Black Greek orgs in the Bay Area in general, first of all, none of them have houses.
Whack.
And they are Bay Area chapters. A lot of them are Bay Area chapters instead of Berkeley chapters, with the exception of like the Alphas and I want to say the AKAs. I'm not sure if the Kappas moved to a Berkeley only chapter, but I know like the Omegas, several others are like there. It's an entire Bay Area chapter rather than
Okay.
just the Cal campus. And yeah, they just don't have the funding to buy a house in the Bay Area. I mean, these houses were all bought 100 years ago,
Right.
bought and
Hence,
built 100 years ago.
right. Hence that whole Harvard legacy discussion that we did that shows how the decades ago funding still permeates access to resources now.
Yeah. Plus, they're just much larger, and they have more funding in general, right? So
Right.
the bigger you are, the more access to capital you have, the better chance of you getting like a fat bank loan or whatever to buy a building
Right.
or renovate it or whatever. So yeah, they don't have spaces. So they can throw their parties at Afro House. So here's the thing: essentially, Afro House, POC House now has been used as an off-campus safe space for POC, for Black
Okay.
folks and POC. However, we already have multiple off and on campus places that are also a safe space. And so I've heard other people saying we need more safe spaces for Black people on campus, and they use that to create the was it the MLK Center? They created one more like specifically Black safe space on campus, but we already
Okay.
had the AASD, which is African American Student Development Center, but geographically it wasn't that big of a space, but it was like a funded thing that had people doing work to develop African American students. We had the BRRC, the Black Retention and Recruitment Center, pretty much the same thing. We had EOPS, which was largely for students of color in general, which had a lot more space, and that was kind of like a de facto BSU in some
Right.
ways. We had Stiles Hall, which was directly across the street from campus, which was always made itself available more or less to Black folks and Black students, and POC interest groups, and a number of nonprofits run out of Stiles Hall. And on the dorms, in Unit 1, there is a entire floor that they call the Afro floor, is the African American themed floor for the dorms. And they have all kinds of programming and stuff. But yeah, it's an entire floor just for Black kids. But yeah, they wanted one more, and then we have Afro House, and then they still said they wanted more safe spaces, which is fine.
Which is fine.
Um,
Do you agree with what was done?
so they said they wanted to
Knowing what you know
ban white people in order to prevent violence.
at one location, right? At one spot.
My question is, has there been any history of violence from white people towards people of color or Black folks in particular at that space? Because y'all make it sound like white folks have been walking up there with tiki torches ready to try to burn the place down or something. First and foremost, the white folks that are in the co-ops in general are very, very Berkeley type people. You don't have
That is true.
You know what I mean? Now that doesn't mean they can't be racist, because there are plenty of racist progressives out there. Okay. That doesn't mean they're not,
especially in Berkeley. Right, because the home ownership for Blacks in Berkeley is under 10%. So there's an equity issue there.
Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, like the people I lived with when I was there, recognized that there was a problem, that like me and one other person were the only Black people in this house of 18 or 19 people. And I challenged them like, hey, this means giving up your spot and going somewhere else. And they understood that, right? And they were okay with that.
Right.
And so I don't necessarily know. From my experience, it doesn't seem like it's necessary to say this, because everyone picture the Berkeley campus is on a giant hill. To get to Afro House, you have to walk all the way up a hill. It is out of the way. Okay. It's
Right.
not really near anything but the stadium, which
Right.
has a new entrance that is a lot more convenient. Okay. So the idea that anybody's going all the way up there to bring any kind of physical violence to Black people, I haven't
Right.
heard of that happening before.
Well, they're gonna have to be
What do
fit
they
because that's a
mean by
long hill.
violence?
Right. And it's a long hill. They better be pretty fit.
Yeah. What do they mean by violence? So what I believe this is one of these things where they're defining violence as, oh, well, this is a form of violence and that is a form of violence. And it essentially comes down to, if you're going to put it one way, you could say it's anybody who disagrees with you. If you put it another way, it's, anyone who, doesn't support Black Lives Matter or thinks Black people shouldn't have the right to blah, 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 blah. And it really just comes down to differing opinions of what does or does not count as violence. And I can get into examples of how emotions can inflame these things on the Berkeley campus, particularly with Black students at Berkeley, because culturally, a lot of people come to Berkeley looking to get their 60s fixed. A lot of people, when they get to Berkeley, they want to make a name for themselves as a radical activist / influencer.
Right.
And
They want to be seen on the news going crazy at Berkeley.
Yes. Some people have very legitimate things to go after, like, raising tuition and fees and shit like that out of nowhere. And so, I've known people who planned in the Berkeley in Afro House. They planned this whole thing where they were going to chain themselves to Wheeler Hall.
Okay. Yes.
As a form of protest.
Right.
Against, fees being raised.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also seen people, on the Afro floor accuse a fraternity of being racist and bringing violence against them because somebody hung a zombie outside of a paper mache zombie outside of a window across the street at a fraternity when they were doing a haunted house. This was like the day of Halloween. It was for their haunted house. There's literally all kinds of other haunted house decorations. This giant sign, come to our haunted house, da da da. And the zombie wasn't even black, it was blue, but it was hung, right? It had a noose around it. And because it was facing the street, which is, and the dorm, the Afro floor is across the street, these people on the Afro floor thought this was an attack against them. And it doesn't help that they're all told that all the fraternities are racist when they walk in. This particular fraternity was majority Asians and Indians, many of whom are not even familiar with the history of what goes on in this country. A lot of them are first generation. Okay. Does that mean they're not racist? Not necessarily, but does that mean they would go out of their way to make a paper mache, doll and hang it out of a window? Do you really think they hate niggas that much? People who barely speak English and don't know any of our history and never heard of the Ku Klux Klan? Like,
right.
It's a bit of a reach to say, it was facing the Afro floor in Unit 1. They wanted us to see it. Nah, dude, they wanted everyone to see it because it's facing the street. So little shit like that happens a lot on the Cal campus. And I think this is just one of those things.